The year was 1872, and the desert stretched endless and merciless across the New Mexico territory. The morning sun had only begun to paint the sand in red and gold when Evelyn Hart, the preacher's daughter from Missouri, felt her whole world burn to ashes in the space of an hour. She had always believed the West was a place of promise, a land her father called God's untamed vineyard. Their wagon train had rolled westward from St. Louis, bound for California, with hymns and hopes rising higher than the dust that trailed behind them. But the West was not all promise. It had a price. It began with a cry, sharp, shrill, and foreign, slicing through the dawn mist. Then came the thunder of hooves, the whine of arrows, and the crack of rifles. The Apaches descended upon the wagons like ghosts born of the desert wind. Evelyn saw men fall, women scream, oxen bolt into the hills. Her father's voice called out scripture over the chaos. "The Lord is my shepherd." And then a single arrow struck him through the throat. Evelyn's scream was swallowed by the roar of the storm around her. She fell to her knees beside his body, clutching his hand as if faith alone could call him back. But before she could even pray, rough hands seized her arms, dragging her away from the fire and death. She struggled, kicking and crying, "Oh, please, no, please." Her bonnet tore loose, golden hair falling around her face. The man who held her was tall, bare-chested beneath a vest of animal hide, his hair bound with a strip of red cloth. The paint across his face glowed like blood under the sunrise. He barked a command in Apache, and the others stopped, turning to look. Evelyn trembled, eyes wide. "Please, I am a virgin," she gasped in broken Spanish. "Soy virgen, ten piedad." "Have mercy." For a heartbeat, silence fell. The warrior's dark eyes, and fierce and hollow as the desert night, fixed on her. Around them his men laughed, jeering in a language she didn't know. But he lifted his hand sharply and they fell quiet. He spoke one word. The others stepped back. Then with a short nod, he gestured for her to be mounted on a spare horse. Evelyn could not know it then. But this man's name was Kohana, the hawk who walks alone. And mercy was not a word that had lived long in his world. The journey to their camp was a blur of heat and terror. Evelyn rode behind Kohana, her wrists bound, her throat raw from crying. The desert spread before her like a burning sea, dunes rising like waves, the horizon a mirage of blue and gold. Her skin blistered under the sun, her lips cracked. The only sound was the steady beat of hooves and the faint rattle of beads and weapons. At last they came upon a hidden valley between cliffs, where the Apache camp lay half hidden by scrub and rock. The smell of smoke and roasted corn drifted on the air. Children ran barefoot, dogs barked, and women looked up from their work to stare at the pale stranger brought among them. Evelyn was shoved toward a small circle of women. One of them, old and wrinkled as the hills, looked her over with eyes sharp as obsidian. She said something to Kohana in a low tone, then took Evelyn by the arm and led her to a small hut of reeds and hides. Inside, the light was dim and smelled of herbs and smoke. The old woman cut the ropes from Evelyn's wrists and pointed to a blanket. Evelyn collapsed onto it, shaking. She wanted to pray, but no words came. Her mind was a whirlwind of grief and confusion. Her father was dead, her people gone. She was alone among strangers who spoke in sounds she couldn't grasp. When the flap of the hut lifted again, it was Kohana. He ducked inside, his shadow filling the space. Evelyn shrank back, clutching the blanket to her chest. He stopped a few feet from her, crouching to her level. His voice was deep, calm, the kind of calm that frightened her more than shouting ever could. He spoke softly, a few words in his tongue, then one in Spanish. "Tranquila. Be still." She didn't understand much, but she heard something in his tone that wasn't cruelty. It was restraint. Kohana placed a piece of dried meat near her feet, then rose and left without another glance. The flap closed and Evelyn was left with her fear, and a growing confusion that the man who had taken her was not the monster she'd been told to expect. Days passed. Though time meant little in that sun-scorched world, Evelyn learned to fetch water, to clean animal hides, to help the old woman, whose name she learned was Nalin. The Apache children would peek into her hut, giggle, then run away. The men still looked at her with curiosity, some with contempt, but none dared touch her. She began to realize why. Kohana had claimed her protection. She saw him often at the edge of camp, tall and silent, sharpening his knife or watching the horizon. Sometimes he would glance her way, not long enough to call it kindness, but not indifference either. One night, a storm rolled over the desert, lightning splitting the sky. The wind howled, tearing at the tents. Evelyn huddled inside her shelter, whispering prayers. Then, through the noise, she heard a shout, a child's cry, and rushed out. A young boy was caught beneath a fallen pole. The wind whipped her hair as she struggled to lift it, her strength failing. Suddenly, Kohana was there, lifting it with one arm, pulling the boy free. He looked at her, soaked and shivering, the stormlight flickering across his face. "You help," he said in halting English. His tone was not surprise, and it was respect. "I couldn't just watch," she answered softly. He nodded once. "Good heart." For Evelyn, the words struck deeper than any sermon ever had. The storm passed, leaving the desert washed clean. That night, as the tribe gathered around the fire to sing and tell stories, Evelyn sat apart, her heart torn between fear and wonder. She watched Kohana laugh, a rare, quiet sound, as one of the boys mimicked a horse's gallop. He looked younger then, almost human in his joy. Evelyn felt something stir, something she didn't want to name. She thought of her father's lessons of right and wrong, of God and sin, and none of them fit anymore. This man, who had every reason to hate her people, had spared her, fed her, protected her, and though her lips still trembled when she prayed, the words had begun to change. She no longer begged for deliverance from the Apache. She begged for understanding of the man who had shown her mercy. As the firelight flickered on Kohana's face, Evelyn realized that mercy could wear many faces, even that of a warrior who had once been her captor. And somewhere deep in the desert, in a land of blood and sand, something unseen began to take root. Not yet love, but its first faint breath. The days that followed the storm changed something between Evelyn Hart and Kohana, though neither spoke of it. The camp moved with the season, drifting north toward the edge of the mountains where the air was thinner and the nights grew cold. Evelyn had learned enough of their ways to keep her hands busy, pounding maize, fetching water from the stream, helping Nalan tend to small wounds and sickness. But even as her body learned, her heart wrestled with its own confusion. Each evening she found herself watching Kohana across the campfires, the way he moved with the easy grace of a man born to silence. He never laughed loudly like the others, never boasted of battle, yet the men respected him, and the children ran to him without fear. It puzzled her. How could a man raised in war, scarred by vengeance, carry such gentleness beneath the surface? She remembered the night of the storm, his hand lifting the beam from the child, his eyes soft with something she hadn't expected to see in an Apache warrior. Compassion. Since then, he had not spoken to her much, only nods, short words in broken English. But there was something in his silence that made her heart race faster than any sermon ever had. One evening, while gathering herbs near the canyon rim, Evelyn saw Kohana below, standing on a ridge and watching the setting sun. The horizon bled gold into purple. She hesitated, then walked down the slope toward him. He turned slightly at the sound of her footsteps. "You walk far," he said in his careful English. "I was looking for sage," she replied. Her hands trembled a little as she held up the bundle she'd gathered. He nodded, glancing at the plants. "For Nalan, good." A long pause followed. The wind carried the cry of a hawk overhead. Evelyn dared to ask softly, "Why did you spare me?" Kohana looked out over the desert. "You prayed," he said simply. "You were not like the others. Fear is not hate," she swallowed hard. "And the others?" He did not answer. The silence stretched, filled with the weight of things she could not understand. Pain, memory, ghosts of violence she had never seen. Finally he said, "Long ago soldiers came. My wife, my son, gone." Her breath caught. "I'm sorry," she whispered. He looked at her then, eyes like onyx under the dying sun. "You are not them." Something in his voice broke through the walls of her heart. The wind grew colder, but she stood frozen, watching the man who was both her captor and her protector. In that moment, the desert felt alive around them, a vast, breathing witness to something neither of them could name. That night, a sandstorm came roaring from the south, black and heavy as a curse. The sky vanished in a swirl of dust. Women shouted, children cried, tents ripped loose. Evelyn tried to hold the reed door of her hut closed, but the wind tore it open, blasting sand into her eyes. Then she felt a strong hand seize her wrist. Kohana pulled her outside and into the shelter of a rock overhang. He wrapped his blanket around her shoulders, shielding her from the sand. The world shrieked around them, dust in the air, thunder rolling across the cliffs. She pressed close to him, trembling. He leaned near so she could hear his voice over the storm. "No fear, it passes soon." She nodded, barely able to breathe. The warmth of his body seeped through the rough blanket, steady and calm. For the first time since leaving Missouri, Evelyn felt something like safety. Not the safety of walls and sermons, but the strength of another soul standing between her and the wild. The storm raged for hours, but in that small hollow of stone, time stopped. When it finally broke and silence fell, Evelyn realized she was still leaning against him. She drew back quickly, her cheeks burning. "Thank you," she whispered. Kohana said nothing, only looked at her with those dark, unreadable eyes. Then with slow precision he lifted the blanket from her shoulders, folded it, and handed it to her. "You keep," he said simply before walking back toward camp. Evelyn clutched the blanket to her chest. It smelled faintly of smoke, leather, and desert wind. Over the next few weeks, her fear began to fade into something gentler. She started learning their words, tu for water, she for ayu for good. The children laughed when she mispronounced them, but they helped her learn. Even Nalin smiled, shaking her head as if to say the pale girl was stubborn as a mule. Kohana watched her progress from afar. One evening, when she managed to ask for bread and halting Apache, he chuckled, the sound low and rare. "Your tongue fights," he teased. She laughed softly. "Your words are hard. Your words are long," he replied. They shared a smile, small, uncertain, but real. One day, Evelyn saw him training a young boy, showing him how to draw a bow. Kohana's movements were patient and precise, his voice calm. When the boy missed, Kohana didn't scold. He simply adjusted the boy's grip, whispered something, and nodded when the arrow struck closer to the mark. Evelyn watched from the edge of camp, feeling something ache inside her. Back in Missouri, the men she'd known measured strength by shouting or boasting. Kohana's strength was quieter, but it seemed to fill the whole earth. Later that evening, she was sitting by the fire, mending a torn shirt. Kohana approached, holding a carved piece of bone. He sat beside her and handed it to her. It was a small pendant in the shape of a bird. "For you," he said. She blinked in surprise. "Why?" He pointed to the pendant. "You small bird?" "Afraid first. Now not afraid." Evelyn's eyes stung. "Thank you," she whispered, fastening it around her neck. He nodded once, satisfied, and rose to leave. But before he turned away, he added in broken English, "You pray to your God. I pray to wind. Maybe both listen." She looked up at him, the firelight dancing across his face. Maybe they do. That night, under a sky scattered with stars, Evelyn lay awake listening to the desert. The wind whispered across the dunes, carrying the faint sounds of drums and laughter from the distant fire. Her fingers touched the pendant at her throat, and she thought of the man who had given it to her, a man who had every reason to hate her kind, and yet had chosen mercy again and again. She wondered what her father would think, seeing her here, wearing an Apache gift and feeling her heart tremble at the sound of a warrior's voice. Perhaps he would call it sin. Perhaps he would call it madness. But Evelyn knew it was neither. It was life, wild, unchained, and frighteningly beautiful. When dawn came, she rose and stepped outside her hut. The world was quiet, the desert wrapped in silver mist. Kohana stood by the fire, feeding it with dry wood. He looked up as she approached, and for a long, wordless moment, they simply watched each other. No walls, no chains, no fear, only the soft beginning of something that had waited patiently beneath the surface of two wounded hearts. The desert was vast, but Evelyn no longer felt lost. Somewhere in its endless silence, she had begun to find herself, and the man whose mercy had become her heartbeat. By the time spring bled into the heat of summer, Evelyn's heart no longer felt like the trembling captive who had cried for mercy that first morning. She had learned the rhythm of Apache life, how to grind maize, how to weave thin cords from desert fiber, how to read the mood of the sky. Her hair had darkened beneath the sun, her hands roughened, her skirts torn and patched. Yet there was peace in her days now, and in the quiet way Kohana watched her, she found something she had never known before: belonging. But peace in the Wild West was a thing built on shifting sand. It never lasted long. The first sign came with a distant sound one morning, faint thunder from the east. The warriors stopped what they were doing, faces turning toward the hills. It was not thunder. It was horses. Many of them. Kohana's expression hardened. He gave sharp orders in Apache, sending women and children into hiding among the rocks. Evelyn, standing near the corral, froze. "What is it?" she whispered. He turned to her, eyes steady. "Soldiers." The word struck her like a stone to the heart. "From the forts?" He nodded. "They come for us. Maybe for you." Her breath caught. Somewhere in that marching column she imagined the flags of her homeland, the polished boots of men who spoke her language, men who would see her and think she needed saving. They would not understand. Kohana handed her a water pouch and his knife. "Go with Nalin, hide in the canyon. No, come out until I call." Evelyn shook her head. "I can't leave you." He grabbed her shoulders, firm but gentle. "You live. That is enough." The command in his voice left no room for argument. Before she could speak again, he turned and strode off toward the line of warriors forming along the ridge. His figure looked cut from the stone itself, proud, silent, unbreakable. Nalin tugged Evelyn's arm, leading her and two small children down into a narrow cleft in the canyon wall. There, beneath a ledge of rock, they waited. The sound of hoofbeats grew louder, closer, until the earth itself seemed to shake. Then came the gunfire. The sharp crack of rifles echoed across the valley, mingling with the whoops of Apache warriors and the shouted commands of the soldiers. Evelyn clutched the children close, whispering prayers through clenched teeth. Smoke rose over the ridge, black against the sky. When at last the sound began to fade, she couldn't stay hidden. Her heart refused. She crawled up the rocky slope, ignoring Nalin's cry, until she reached a point overlooking the battlefield. Bodies lay scattered among the stones. Men in blue coats, men in feathers and paint. The air stank of powder and blood. Her eyes searched desperately until she found him, Kohana, fighting hand to hand with a soldier who wore an officer's hat. It was Captain Ross. Ross had been a family friend back in Missouri, a man who'd once courted Evelyn when she was 17. He'd written poetry and called her Angel of the Plains. Now as she saw him swing his saber at Kohana, her stomach turned to ice. Kohana ducked the blade and drove his fist into Ross's jaw, sending him sprawling. But before he could strike again, more soldiers poured over the ridge, surrounding him. A rifle butt slammed against his head, dropping him to his knees. "Stop!" Evelyn screamed, stumbling down the slope. "Stop!" The soldiers turned, astonished. "Miss Hart?" one shouted. "Is that Lord above? It's her." Captain Ross struggled to his feet, bleeding from the lip, staring in disbelief. "Evelyn?" She ran to him, breathless, tears streaking her dust-stained face. "Don't hurt him," she cried, pointing to Kohana, who knelt in chains of rope, his chest rising and falling with quiet defiance. Ross's eyes darted between them. "That savage?" "Evelyn, he took you. We've been searching for months. He saved me." She cut him off. "He spared me when he could have killed me. He fed me, protected me. He's no savage." The men exchanged uncertain glances. Ross stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You don't know what you're saying. You've been with them too long. They've turned your head." "No," she whispered fiercely. "They've opened my eyes." He grabbed her arm, but she wrenched free. "Don't you dare call him a savage," she hissed. "You and your men brought this war here, not them." Ross's jaw clenched. "I'm taking you home, Evelyn. You're not yourself." He motioned to his men.
"Bind the Indian."
"We'll bring him to Fort Bowie. The general will decide what to do." Kohana said nothing as they tied his hands. His gaze met Evelyn's, calm even in defeat. "No cry," he murmured in Apache. "Deserts still remember." Her tears fell anyway. They marched for 2 days toward the fort, the soldiers wary, the few surviving Apache prisoners silent. Evelyn rode among them, her heart split clean in two, torn between the world that had raised her and the one that had shown her what love meant. At night, she sat near Kohana, guarded by soldiers who eyed her with suspicion. The firelight flickered over his face, bruised, bloodied, but proud. "I should have died there," he said quietly in his tongue. She shook her head. "No, you can't, not like this." He looked at her, eyes softening. "You come far from Sky Place." "I came because of you," she whispered. "You taught me mercy. You taught me love." For the first time, his expression wavered. Love, he repeated as if tasting the word. Then he gave a faint, tired smile. You brave, Ayoshi. You are good, my heart. Her breath caught at the tenderness in his tone. She reached for his hand through the ropes, but the guard barked, "Back away, miss," and shoved her aside. That night, while the camp slept, Evelyn made her choice. She rose silently, heart pounding, and crept to the horses. The moon hung low, red as blood. She moved among the shadows, cutting the reins of the picket line, loosening saddles. The horses snorted softly, restless. Then she went to Kohana, slashing through the ropes that bound his wrists. His eyes widened in shock. "Go," she whispered. "Now," he caught her hand. "No, you come," she shook her head. "They'll follow. I'll distract them." But he refused. "We go together." Before she could protest, he whistled sharply. The horses reared, panic spreading through the camp. Men shouted, grabbing for their rifles. Kohana pulled her onto a mount, swung up behind her and kicked hard. They burst through the chaos as shots rang out. Fire exploded behind them. One of the wagons had caught flame. Evelyn clung to him, the wind tearing at her hair, her heart hammering with terror and wild joy. They didn't stop until the sun rose, casting gold over the vast emptiness. Only then did Kohana slow the horse and look back. Smoke curled in the far distance, the burning camp. Evelyn looked at him through tears. "What now?" He reached out, brushing the dust from her cheek. "Now we live." They rode on until they found a narrow canyon with a spring bubbling from the rock. There they rested, exhausted but free. Evelyn knelt by the water, washing the grime from her face. Kohana crouched beside her, his hand trembling slightly as he touched her shoulder. "You leave your people for me," he said quietly. "I didn't leave them," she answered. "They left me long ago. I just didn't know it." He looked at her for a long moment, then drew her into his arms. For the first time, she did not pull away. Under the rising sun, they held each other. Two souls who had survived fire and blood, bound now by something no law or nation could undo. The trial had burned away everything else. What remained was love, fierce, forbidden, and eternal as the desert sky. After their escape, Evelyn and Kohana ride until the horses stumble from exhaustion. They find a hidden canyon where a narrow stream winds between stone walls and cottonwoods bend in the wind. There they build a small camp of brush and hides. The desert that once felt cruel now becomes their refuge. Evelyn tends the wounded warrior, washing dust and blood from his cuts with water from the spring. She learns how to start a fire with flint and cactus fiber, and he shows her where the desert keeps its secrets: roots for food, hollows that hold water, trails that lead nowhere unless you know them. Slowly, fear turns to quiet trust. In the hush of those canyon days, they speak more freely. Kohana tells her of his people, the raids, the broken treaties, the loss that hollowed his heart. Evelyn tells him of her father's sermons, of the hymns she once sang on Sunday mornings. Around the small fire at night, they trade words, English, Apache, fragments of Spanish, until meaning belongs to neither tongue but to the feeling that passes between them. Time softens the edges of their worlds. When a hawk circles overhead, Kohana calls it a blessing. Evelyn begins to believe it. She sews a small flag of woven grass and ties it near the spring, calling it our truce. He nods in agreement, saying that even the wind must rest somewhere. By late summer, the canyon fills with color, sage in bloom, purple shadows sliding down the cliffs. For the first time since leaving Missouri, Evelyn feels that she is exactly where she is meant to be. The preacher's daughter who once prayed for rescue now prays only for peace. Autumn creeps into the canyon without warning. The nights turn sharp, the wind sliding down from the mountains carrying the smell of rain. Evelyn and Kohana live quietly, trading labor for harmony. He hunts rabbits and gathers mesquite beans. She keeps the fire alive, dries meat, and hums the soft hymns she remembers from home. The sound of her voice becomes part of the canyon itself, but peace in the frontier is as fragile as glass. One morning, the horses snort and stamp, ears pricked toward the ridge. Kohana studies the dust plume curling against the horizon. Riders, maybe soldiers, maybe bounty men looking for runaways. The moment he sees it, his jaw tightens. He knows the world they tried to leave has found them again. They pack in silence. Evelyn hides the few things that matter: a strip of cloth from her father's Bible, the carved bird pendant Kohana once gave her, a pouch of dried sage. If they come, he says, we run north. The desert remembers our trail. But the riders arrive before noon. 2 scouts in worn blue coats spot the smoke from their fire. They call out in English, "Camp down there." A white woman. Evelyn's heart lurches. To the soldiers, she's a victim. To the world, she's something that needs to be saved. She looks at Kohana. "We can't fight them," she says. He shakes his head. No fight. Only truth. When the soldiers descend, they're startled to see her standing beside the warrior, not behind him. The officer in front, a young lieutenant, raises a hand. "Miss, are you being held? You can come with us. You'll be safe." Evelyn steps forward, her voice steady, though her hands tremble. "I am safe. He's harmed no one." The men exchange uneasy glances. One mutters, "She's lost her senses." The lieutenant lowers his pistol. "Ma'am, the army can't leave you here." Kohana remains still, the wind stirring the feathers braided in his hair. "She chews," he says quietly. The simplicity of his words cuts through the noise of the canyon like a blade. For a moment, no one speaks. Then the lieutenant sighs. "The war's dying out anyway," he says, almost to himself. "We're not here for blood." He orders his men to stand down. "Stay hidden if you must. The frontier's big enough for ghosts." With that, the soldiers turn their horses and ride back toward the desert rim. Evelyn watches them go, the sound of hooves fading into the wind. Relief floods her, but so does sorrow. She knows they've seen what few will believe. A preacher's daughter and an Apache warrior choosing each other's company over the world they came from. That night, the canyon glows beneath a wide, pale moon. Kohana sits by the stream carving a new pendant from turquoise. He ties it to a thin strip of hide and places it around her neck. "Sky stone," he says. "For when I am gone, you remember." She closes her fingers over the pendant. "You're not leaving." He smiles faintly. "One day I will, but not tonight." They sit together in silence, listening to the water run between the stones. The desert hums softly, like a lullaby that belongs to both of them now. 2 worlds had collided in fire and loss, yet here in this quiet canyon, they've built something neither side can name. A life stitched together by mercy, faith, and the stubborn will to endure. As the dawn creeps over the ridge, painting the cliff's gold, Evelyn whispers, "Whatever happens, this place is our promise." Kohana nods. "The wind will tell our story." And when the morning breeze sweeps through the canyon, it carries with it the sound of that promise, faint but unbroken, across the endless western sky. Years pass like the river winding through the desert, slow, steady, unhurried by time. The world beyond the canyon changes. Railroads cross the plains. Towns rise where buffalo once thundered. Preachers, traders, and soldiers move westward, each staking a claim on land that had never belonged to anyone but the wind. But deep in the folds of red rock, Evelyn and Kohana live by the old rhythm of the sun. They build a small cabin near the spring. Its walls are made of cedar poles and clay, its roof of willow and grass. To the eye of a passing rider, it would look like nothing more than a shadow among many. Yet to them it is home. In spring they plant a small garden, corn, beans, and squash. In summer they gather herbs that grow wild along the stream. Evelyn's hands grow strong from work, her skin bronzed by the sun she once feared. Kohana hunts less now. He teaches her how to read the wind, how to track without leaving prints, how to listen to the silence between sounds. One evening, while the light fades and the sky burns crimson, Evelyn asks quietly, "Do you ever miss your people?" Kohana stares at the horizon for a long time before answering. "A warrior carries his people in his blood," he says. "But the world has changed. The young ones are sent to far places, taught to forget. The songs fade. Evelyn takes his hand. Then we'll remember them here." From that day, she begins to write in a small journal, one she's kept since Missouri, its pages once filled with trembling prayers. Now she writes the words he teaches her, Apache names for stars, rivers, animals, and the seasons. The language becomes her new hymn, each word a promise that their story will not vanish into dust. As years roll on, storms test them, floods, droughts, fever. Once Kohana falls ill after a winter hunt, and for days Evelyn fears she'll lose him. She gathers herbs, keeps a fire burning, whispers the prayers her father once said over the sick. When he wakes, weak but alive, she smiles through tears. "Seems heaven still listens," she says. Kohana answers with a faint grin. "Maybe heaven lives here now." They grow older together in that quiet wilderness. When travelers pass, prospectors, herders, or lost souls chasing something they can't name, they sometimes stop for water. They see the woman with pale hair and the old Apache beside her and whisper stories about them in distant towns. Some call her the preacher's daughter who vanished. Others say she was taken or bewitched. No one ever knows the truth, and they prefer it that way. One summer, a young rider brings news from the settlements. "The wars are over," he says. "The army's leaving the territory. Peace at last." Evelyn nods, though she knows peace came to her long before. That evening, she and Kohana climb to the ridge above the canyon, where the desert stretches like an endless sea of light. The sun sinks low, setting the horizon aflame. He stands behind her, his hand resting gently on her shoulder. "When I first saw you," she says softly, "I was afraid of everything. You, the desert, the silence. I thought love was something that had to be earned." He turns her toward him. "Love is something that survives," he says. "Like the desert, like you." They watch as the sun drops below the mountains, leaving behind a trail of fire. The air hums with crickets and wind. Evelyn presses the turquoise pendant at her neck, the same one he gave her years ago. Its color catches the last light of day, glowing like a piece of sky held close to earth. When night comes, they sit together, watching the stars bloom one by one. He begins to hum an old Apache song, a tune of farewell and hope. Evelyn leans her head against his shoulder and closes her eyes. The words are foreign, but she understands them all the same. Sometime later, when the first light of dawn touches the canyon again, only the whisper of the wind remains, moving through the rocks, through the cedar trees, through the little cabin by the stream. It carries with it the faint sound of a hymn and an old warrior's song blending together. And though the world forgets their names, the desert does not. Every sunrise over that canyon tells their story, of the preacher's daughter who found her soul in the wild and the Apache warrior who taught her that love, like the land, belongs to no one, and yet to everyone who has the courage to stay.